Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul School and Foundation's Fireside Chats with Lacy Frazer and Marie Mohler. I'm here today with Lacy. Good morning, Lacy.
Hi, Marie.
And we are going to be focusing in the month of March on self-awareness, integrating shadow and light. And what I wanted to do first, Lace, is to talk a little bit about how we focused in January on the ego and the conditioned self. And we essentially are all born into this world, this innate, amazing, light-filled, talented, aware, sensitive human being. And we're born into a set of conditions, cultural conditions, family conditions, societal conditions, all kinds of conditions. And so from the moment we really take our first breath, we really are assigned a set of conditions in the world the way it is today. And we journey that process in our childhoods and as we develop and grow into the adults that we've become today. And unless you are participating in a conversation with people like Lacy and I right now, talking about all of these concepts that make us who we are, it's not something that necessarily is at the forefront of people's consciousness. So we really want to, what I wanted to highlight first is that we're talking about, or spotlighting really, the ego and the conditioned self. And then in February, we spoke about the ego's clever armor, right? Its defenses and its arsenal. And that's what we, over time in our lives, develop to protect this conditioned self that really is an inauthentic self or a false self. It's not really our true self that we were designed and divinely designed, I would say, to be.
I think if I can interject here, Marie, I think that what's difficult for a lot of people to hear or to understand is that they may be living an inauthentic life. And I think what you and I are really trying to do, because we've walked this path and we continue to walk this path. So our goal is to really help people start to have questions and be curious about a different way of being and to instill a sense of inspiration that life can be different as we take this journey to find out who we really are underneath all of that armor. But to do that, we have to have an awareness that who we are is really an ego identity, is really a sort of false self that's been developed over time and conditioned through our environment. So once we come to, at least at the very least, begin to accept that there could be more to who we are, then we can start to take the steps on the journey to uncover an authentic self and to live life in a very different way. And I think that's what we've been doing as we put the idea of a conditioned self on the table in January, as we talked about the ego identity and its defenses in February. And now in March, we're really asking our listeners to start to pay close attention to their own selves and how they walk through the world. And in order to do that, you have to really gain a sense of awareness of self. And there are very specific ways about how to do that. And I'm excited to talk about those ways and those steps that we need to take. So this concept of self-awareness is really probably one of the main tools in our toolbox to get to living a life of authenticity. So I think starting off with a quote by the famous psychoanalyst Carl Jung may provide a good jumping off point for a deeper discussion about self-awareness. So Carl Jung said, "We don't become enlightened by pretending to be perfect. We become enlightened when we have the courage to acknowledge and embrace our darkness." And I think that we have not spoken about this quite yet, but that is one of the bigger points that we're going to discuss today, is that self-awareness is not just about looking and acknowledging at our strengths and our positive aspects, but it's also about
Becoming aware of the parts of ourselves that we tend to want to deny or avoid.
Yes, exactly. So I think that self-awareness is not always a comfortable process. Some people even call it sort of disturbing and disruptive at times. But true self-awareness, while it can be painful, it leads to tremendous growth and tremendous authenticity once we can get there. So I think what's really important today and what we're talking about this month are the tools that we can learn to become more self-aware. And by the way, I think we use the words self-awareness and consciousness kind of interchangeably at Whole Soul. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. I believe, too, that self-awareness and consciousness are similar energies. But I will say, for the purpose of our conversation in March, we're focused on the language of self-awareness.
Yes.
And so when we're focused on self-awareness, I want to talk about the fact that there are aspects inside all of us that underlie our conditioned selves and our conscious selves, whether or not we are aware of them. And those aspects are our shadow and our light. And to put it simply, the shadow for this conversation they're the parts of ourselves that we don't want to see, the aspects of ourselves that we feel shame or guilt or trauma or some form of wounding or just something that's uncomfortable about ourselves that we don't really want to know. And we push that way down, like we talked about in those other podcasts, like a pillow in a tight pillowcase. We really shove it way down inside ourselves because our culture doesn't allow us and support us to really embrace looking at those parts of ourselves that are the shadow. So the shadow is by definition, right, the parts of ourselves that we don't want to see, that's almost in the absence of light. And our light comprises our talents, our gifts, the accolades we want to receive in our professions and our careers and our jobs and who we are. That's the part of us that we want to wear outside of ourselves. We want everybody to know about who we are. We feel proud of those things. It's the parts of us that we want people celebrating. And that's quite a contrast between the light and the shadow. And I would say that there are, if this was a continuum or a timeline of some kind, that there are hash marks in between, right? There's the extreme shadow and the extreme light. And then there's all these other parts of ourselves that fall somewhere in between those two things. But while we're living our lives every single day in our families, if we're students going to school, if we're going to work, whatever we're doing in our daily lives, we do have these aspects that are partially, and I would say largely, responsible for creating our lives. They're really an energy in our lives, and we're going to talk about energy in some later podcasts. But for the purpose of this conversation, the shadow and the light are part of what's informing us every day in the choices that we choose to make, in how we're showing up, and how people are seeing us in our external world. And the shadow is something that can be going on the inside that we can try and hide or deny inside ourselves and try and avoid facing in some way. Would you say that
Oh, absolutely. And what I was thinking as you were talking, that's so important, I think, for people to know, and it's something that I've had to really realize too, is that these shadow aspects that have been sort of suppressed and denied are still alive and well energetically inside of us and are really, without us knowing sometimes, informing how we walk through the world, how we interact with people, how we talk to people, how we view ourselves, how we view others. And it also is informing our defensive structure, how we are reacting to things that come our way that don't feel so good. So I think what's so important about what we're saying is we're acknowledging that yes, we can put forward for the world to see a lot of wonderful traits and characteristics, and at the same time we aren't even realizing that we're denying sort of these darker, shadowy aspects within ourselves that are actually informing a lot more about who we think we are than we know.
Exactly.
Does that make sense? Because I know that that's a mouthful, but I think it's so important. I can really feel the energy of that.
Well, and I will just say a couple more things. We all have shadow and light. There's no one that's immune to shadow, right? Even the gurus through time and in our history books, in our religious texts, even the gurus and the avatars and the ascended masters had shadow and light. So it's important to say at this point in the conversation, in here on Whole Soul School and Foundation in our Fireside Chats, but also in your own inner conversations, is that we all have these aspects of shadow and light inside us. And while we might point to an ascended master, an avatar, or some great prophet, or somebody in world history, Martin Luther King, who is an amazing speaker and inspirer of many people, no matter who you think about that you revere as to be somebody who's evolved, who's spreading love in the world, who's acting in their talents and being in their light, they too have shadow aspects. What makes them seem different or above or outside of us as something that's great, or that they're embodying some form of greatness inside themselves, is that they got in touch with their shadow and their light.
Yes.
Right? And so it's really important that these shadow aspects of ourselves are things that want to be known to us too. And from my view, Lacy, is that the shadow aspects, when we push them way down, what we're doing is we're creating more conditions and we're creating more defenses and things we have to defend because we simply don't want to know about them. And that's what guarantees that we're going to continue to have this tough metal armor on the outside that's protecting these wounds inside us that are our shadow traits and some things that are part of our experiences from other timelines that didn't feel good or made us uncomfortable, or other experiences earlier in our life that just make us bring up feelings of shame or discomfort in some way. It's the person who's ready to start looking at that shadow and starts to become aware of the human condition. Part of being human is having both of these traits and aspects inside us, and learning how to work with them and integrate them and know them deeply and intimately, that we can start to transform ourselves back into love and back into a greater sense of wholeness and a greater sense of authenticity, that we know who we are,
So well said, Marie. And one of the key words I feel like you used was transformation. And I really believe that personal transformation occurs when we have the courage to face our own shadow. We must look at the dark in addition to the light, no matter how painful or difficult it is. And so I think today I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we can use to help address these parts of ourselves.
Yes, and that's what I just wanted to say one more thing, Lacy, is that, once we become aware of the ego and the conditioned self and the armor that protects it, self-awareness is the antidote or the remedy to that conditioned and inauthentic life that many of us have been living. Excuse me. So self-awareness is the actual remedy and the antidote. And then inside self-awareness, we can begin to gather resources and tools to support our increasing self-awareness that can help us live in a greater authenticity and joy and abundance and prosperity in our lives, which for many people listening to this, they're listening because they want what's on the other side of this whole transformational journey experience. They want to know what they're desiring to live in a greater sense of joy and purpose and meaning in their life. But self-awareness is the bridge to get us there.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
So one of the first things I want to talk a little bit about if I was speaking to somebody who says, well, where do I start this journey? How do I start this journey to uncover who I really am? And one of the first things I like to teach about is the concept of witnessing the self. And how can we have to be willing to kind of step outside of ourselves and watch ourselves. Observe ourselves interacting with other people. Observe our thought processes. That's what journaling is about in some way. We have to be willing to witness our interactions with other people, witness how we're responding to people, witness how we're thinking about something. And that's not always an easy thing to do, because our lives are very often self-focused, very distractible. We tend to be very judgmental of ourselves and of other people. That's part of our conditioning. So in order to kind of really begin the process of gaining awareness of ourselves, we need to be able to witness ourselves. Would you like to add to that?
I was just going to say, and I think when we're in the act of witnessing, when we engage that energy and that process in our lives versus just being fully in our lives in a more unconscious state, when we're unconscious and we're not self-aware, when we're in experiences, we're basically in a position of having to react. Because we're just in it all the time with no other higher perspective informing our lives or that particular experience on a moment-to-moment basis. So we're in a position of reactiveness when we are not witnesses of our own experiences. But when we become a witness, there's a part of us inside ourselves that you might call the soul, you might call it your spirit, you might call it your higher self. You might call it just your better self, your wiser self, whatever you want to call that. When you allow yourself to consciously engage, being a witness of your life and paying attention to how you're showing up and interacting with yourself first and with other people at the office, in school, in social situations, with our pets, with our animals, with people, driving in traffic. There's so many opportunities every day to pay attention to how we just watching ourselves from a place of, I think it's been called the witness observer. You're kind of observing yourself while you're inside yourself, but you're watching yourself show up in all the situations of your day, all the experiences of your day. And I just wanted to add that when we are able to get in that witness observer place inside ourselves, now we're not only the human having this conditioned experience that has to be reactive. We get to be this higher presence inside ourselves, engaging a wiser, lighter, brighter version of ourselves that can just simply watch and observe who we're showing up to be in our lives in this present moment. And this witnessing aspect is part of what is the first step in gaining that self-awareness and seeing our different aspects of shadow and light vie for our attention and expression on a daily basis.
And what's coming to my mind as you're talking about that is to just give a real life practical example. I can't tell you how many times I have witnessed myself say something to, say, one of my children that really the situation didn't call for my response. And I responded, I witnessed myself respond in a way that I wish I didn't. And it allowed me, when you're in the witnessing mindset, it allows you to kind of course correct in the moment. And so I can't tell you how many times I have done something or said something in the moment,
out of your conditioning,
out of my conditioning,
out of your conditioned response.
Exactly. Caught up in the emotion of something, caught up in the energy of something. And as I'm witnessing that in myself, I am then able to stop myself and to say to the other person, you know what? I did not mean to say it that way, or I responded out of an emotional place. Would you allow me to redo this interaction? And I can actually go back and that person will redo the interaction and allow me to respond in a different way, and oftentimes from a more loving and more self-aware place.
It's a pretty incredible tool in the toolbox when we're growing our self-awareness. If self-awareness was a garden, right, that witnessing is a critical tool and critical element in our journey to personal transformation, to be able to witness ourselves demonstrating or emitting or expressing a certain kind of behavior or energy or reaction of any kind. And we get to, like you said, course correct in the moment, which can be incredibly empowering.
Incredibly.
And I find that oftentimes some of the people, I won't say everyone in your life will respond positively to this, but you can look for the people in your life who will let you practice this witness observer self. And witnessing yourself demonstrate a shadow aspect that's coming from some other experience that you've had at some point in your life, right? And say, I want to do that differently. And they can allow you to redo that, replay that, restate that, and work it through. And so maybe not for everybody listening that's going to happen every single time the first time you decide to witness yourself. But it happens over time once you start to embrace this as a tool in your self-awareness garden. Let's keep using that example, that it does get better and better, and more opportunities do present themselves for that redo or for that reset to who you really want to consciously choose yourself to be versus who you're acting on kind of an autopilot or default setting like we've talked about before.
Yes.
So the witness observer instills kind of a pause or this subtle, almost guardian angel, watchful eye of yourself to mentor you through how you want to live your life now that you're aware that there's choice.
Yes, and not only that, but you are also in that moment modeling for the other person
that it's possible for them too.
Exactly.
So
witnessing is a very powerful tool for self-awareness and discovery of self-awareness. So the second tool I want to talk about is the concept of feedback. And I sort of see this in two ways. Because really, if the goal is to understand ourselves better, the goal is to have a holistic view of ourselves, and we're journeying back to this place of authenticity and knowing our light in addition to our shadow. One of the ways that we can learn more about ourselves, because that is our goal, is to pay attention to the feedback from others. Now, that may be literal verbal feedback that we get over the course of time in our life, or it may be witnessing how others are responding to us. Behavioral feedback, exactly. So it's really paying attention to the themes in relationships, maybe, in the feedback that we've been given over time. Does somebody call me selfish a lot of the time?
Where have I heard that before? Kind of question that you might say to yourself.
Right.
There seems to be a pattern in that feedback I get in my life experiences from all different kinds of people. And if it's one scenario and there's somebody who's calling you selfish, but you can't find that pattern anywhere else, then that may not be necessarily feedback that is fully relevant to you. But if you are receiving feedback from multiple people in your life, and all of us have this, all of us have these particular themes and patterns and threads of something we've heard not once, not twice, but probably multiple times in our lives. That's the kind of thing we're talking about, paying attention to that feedback loop from other people and other relationships. And Lacy, I don't know if you were going to say more, but I just wanted to say what's important when we're listening, we become open to listening to that feedback from all the interactions we have every single day in our lives. But the key word there to me is the openness. We have to become open to the feedback, because the feedback's always coming. The feedback's in our lives every day, right? It's a steady element of the human condition here on the planet. But the openness is the variable of choice. And there are people who are closed to feedback, and we may be one of those people, right? That we may have been closed to our own feedback. But the invitation here that we're posing to all of you is to become more open and to become consciously open to using the feedback you're seeing in the relationships and interactions you have with all kinds of people in your daily lives as a critical tool in growing your self-awareness, because that feedback is going to point out to you things that are about you and your true self, and things that are not about you that other people might be saying about you that could be a projection and a defense of theirs. And you can see how this is an active process. This journey of personal transformation is an active process where there's not an exact rule book. There's not a template for how this goes for every single person. And the patterns for every single person are different. You have to learn to become aware and open to listening to what's your feedback. And what's the feedback if you start paying attention to what are the themes of that feedback. And if it happens more than once or twice or 3 times, that's a theme of feedback for you to take another look at, and then to pay attention as your witness observer self to see that playing out and see if at some point you can have a resetting type experience or a redo or a corrective experience.
Well, and I'd like to say too that you can really, that you are responding to something or something's going on that you need to pay attention to, especially when you start feeling defensive. So that's always a clue that something's going on within you. And it's really easy to blame other people or the circumstance for what's going on, of why you're not feeling good or why you're feeling protective, or you need to fight back, or you need to justify yourself, or you need to explain.
Judge or project back something as a retort. Right.
So that self-awareness is paying attention to how you are responding in certain situations. And when you start feeling defensive in any way, especially in the ways we've just outlined, then that's a clue to you. That should be like, ding, ding, ding. Okay, something's going on here that I need to witness. I need to step back from. I need to ask myself what's really going on.
And to make maybe a final point on this one tool, Lacy, is that openness to awareness to the feedback doesn't mean an openness to accept the feedback. It just means that you're going to become open to be aware of it and realize that everything in your life is some form of feedback. Your pet's relationship with you, how your children respond to you and interact with you, your relationship with your boss and your coworkers, your relationship with other students at school, your relationship with other people in your social networks. These are all an opportunity to be open to the feedback that you're seeing in all these experiences. But it doesn't mean that you're going to accept every single one, because some things are truly about you, and some things might be about somebody else that they had to play out, and you were just somebody in the theater of our lives that they played it out with. And so that's why, again, these are tools for the journey, but the journey is an every moment awareness.
It's a constant. I was feeling as you were talking. It's a dynamic feedback loop. I mean, if you're living and breathing and walking through the world,
yes,
then you are walking in the matrix of the feedback loop. And that may be difficult for some to understand, but the concept is really that every moment in life, every thought, feeling, behavior, and interaction
is
experience
mirroring something about you or your journey and your lessons and your invitation to this personal transformation. So everything in your life starts to have meaning when you start to walk through your life more consciously,
yes,
and in a more self-aware state. And for this point, I think the openness is really important. That witness-observer state is important, and pausing judgment. The witness-observer doesn't judge. They just observe what's going on from a place of neutrality. And from that place of neutrality, there's a ton of information in every exchange and experience we have. And so I think this is a vital and valuable tool in the becoming more self-aware, which again is the antidote and the remedy to the conditioned self. So it's a key point, key tool number one.
and also there is a kind of another side to this feedback concept, which I was listening to a TED Talk recently, and the gentleman who gave the TED Talk talked about the fact that we have a moral obligation to give constructive feedback to those people in our lives and who we interact with. So it's not just about paying attention to our own feedback that we're getting in order to increase our self-awareness. We do have an obligation to give other people feedback. Now, part of me hesitates in saying that because we could be judgmental and it could not be constructive. But I think that when you can work with the people you're closest with in your life,
in your inner circle, more or less,
yes, and be willing to share some feedback within a kind and gentle sort of construct,
and being more authentic,
then you can help each other learn about the self.
Yes, and that's why some form, and we'll talk about this probably another time, that a sense of community, of finding even, a community can be 2 or 3 other people. You don't have to have hundreds of people that are living this way or trying to become more conscious, but just to have 1 or 2 or 3 other people where you can feel safe to risk a new behavior, try out something new, that you be more authentic in a way that you haven't been before. It's highly, highly valuable. And so that obligation that person, I think, I can't remember his name. We can post that in the comments section for sure, and post the link to his TED Talk because it was interesting. But I would say that there's all different kinds of feedback that we're receiving every day and that people are giving to us every day. But that can be verbal, but that can be behavioral. And sometimes choosing to say no, to spend time with somebody, to go to the movies or to go out to dinner with somebody that you always feel like you're drained of energy. Right? Your energy or your happiness or your sense of vitality goes down when you spend time with that person. If you witness that over time, part of giving feedback to people is to step away from some experiences consciously that just don't serve your better good, your greater good, your feeling of the brighter self that you're wanting and desiring to be. So, there are many, many, many aspects to this journey, and I think we've just named one of the tools of self-awareness.
Well, 2, really. We talked about witnessing, and we talked about feedback.
Being open to feedback.
Yeah.
So do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah, I think the third thing that I want to talk a little bit about is the concept of triggers and learning what personally triggers us. So when we talk about triggers, we are talking about basically situational experiences, people, or conditions in our lives that kind of tend to ignite a negative reaction inside of us, a negative emotional response. And I taught this for many years working with men in prison, and I do this now with my coaching clients. Due to our conditioning, we all have developed responses to certain experiences in our life. We get triggered, right? We get pushed. Our buttons get pushed. Yes. I always kind of gave the metaphor. It's like if we had this electronic motherboard on our chest that had all of these lights.
You could light up that circuitry.
That circuitry.
With the right trigger.
Exactly. And so we have to learn what our triggers are. Because if we're trying to learn about self-awareness, and we're trying to understand our responses and why we are responding in a certain way to people, places, and experiences, it's very, very helpful to understand what triggers us personally, what triggers those negative emotional responses personally.
And in that way, if we've talked about self-awareness as a garden, but if we talked about life as a theater, right? That everybody's showing up in our lives, whether it's a casual exchange at the grocery store and somebody we'll never see again, somebody on social media that we'll never see again, or somebody that we see every single day in our lives and we, for some reason, experience a trigger-like response to their energy or their way of being or how they talk to us. In the theater, we couldn't become more self-aware if we didn't have other actors around us to reflect to us how we're responding. So again, sometimes these triggers are about something inside us. Oftentimes, if they're a trigger, they are ours in some way. Feedback can just be somebody else's perception, and we can take a look at whether it's a trigger or not. So, but looking at life as a stage, as a theater, and that every interaction has some kind of meaning because it's telling us a little bit about ourselves, either things we enjoy and love and want more of and want to increase, or things that we really don't enjoy, things we want to avoid, deny, shame, project about, or, have a temper tantrum about in some way in our lives. It's really important. And this knowing our triggers helps us to become more self-aware, that over time we can start to recognize, if say you're an introvert and you've gone out 4 or 5 nights a week to dinner things or social events or things connected to work, if you're self-aware as an introverted person, you might recognize and say, I need a little bit of downtime for myself, or my triggers are going to be raw. If I go to a 5th or 6th or 7th event this week, I'm not taking care of myself, and there are situations that would promote my triggers being exposed to myself and others. And so self-awareness can help create a greater sense of peace and, I would say, empowerment in our lives, because when we know ourselves and we know our triggers, we don't have to judge them. We just have to understand that that's a part of us. And we almost get to partner with them or become like a good friend to them and think about, how do I need to take care of that part of myself today? Like the introvert, how do I need to engage some self-care here to make sure that I'm taking care of myself so that I can either neutralize my triggers in those situations, or so that I can clear them altogether, or that at least I can honor them, that they're there and they don't need to be exposed to whatever that particular choice would be right now. And so again, I guess triggers to me go hand in hand with a kind of higher awareness and greater self-care.
Well, and you outlined that so well and gave some good explanations of really what we're doing here is we're managing our emotions.
Yes.
So we're learning to manage our emotions, especially our negative emotional states.
Exactly.
And you also, if I may use what you said as a segue into our next tool, which is the concept of not judging our feelings.
Yes.
That if you allow feelings to simply be what they are without judging them or labeling them, you're more likely to increase your ability to use them as a helpful guidance system, which is what you just described.
Right.
In order to better understand them and where they come from, their impact on your perceptions, and their role in your life.
Exactly. And any of these shadow aspects, what they really want to become is assets. Because when we start to value the information and the feedback loop that they're giving to us about ourselves, this is also part of the journey of personal transformation, is that we start to really value when something uncomfortable comes up. And I know that may be down the road for some listeners today, or it may be validation for others. I know that I am not immune to uncomfortable situations. I've had several crop up in the last month's time. And so, but what I have now as somebody who has engaged the journey of personal transformation for many years now, I know that that's an opportunity for me to take a look at what's uncomfortable inside me, to not judge my feelings about that, to not do my best to not judge the actor in the theater that we're all playing who's showing this part of myself and potentially this trigger. And I can extract the marrow of what that's trying to show me about me, which usually is some unresolved conflict or wound or something that I've had play out in my life through time. And this is just another person tweaking that thread inside me that is tied to that pain. And so if we don't judge our feelings, we can allow a vast amount of awareness and knowledge to flow inside us, to start to connect some inner dots, to release some things, and to begin to heal some of those things that were once painful. They become less painful the more we value what the information is that's inside them. Does that make sense, Lacy?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So by not judging, we can start to convert some shadow aspects into assets, into self-knowledge. And self-knowledge and self-awareness, when it's applied, looks like wisdom. And a lot of the avatars and the ascended masters, again, we go back to the sacred texts. We go back to, a lot of the people we would call that would be in our circle of the greats. And the people who got to that stage had already applied this knowledge, had lived it long enough that it became who they were. They were authentic in how they expressed themselves to be, which is why their story has been told through the decades or the centuries. And we are that person. We are that character. We are that great or that ascended master in our own journey to discover the very same thing. And so if we want to have that wisdom inside us, we must learn to not judge our feelings, but to observe them, not personalize them, but value them so that you can extract the teaching that's inside and the revelation that wants to come to you about you. Does that make sense?
Well, not only does it make sense, it sort of feels like we should end there because that was such a beautiful summary of all of what we've said so far. I think
there's a few more at least to name. Do you want
there
to
are.
name?
I think we're going to talk a little bit about this concept of present moment awareness and also about making deliberate choices in the moment, which you've sort of alluded to. But let's just talk about present moment awareness for a minute. In order to practice witnessing, in order to practice listening for feedback and giving feedback, in order to practice non-judgment, right? We have to be aware in the moment that all of this is going on and that we have the groundedness and presence of mind to be in this present moment, in this now.
Yes.
Right? And I want to use a little analogy I use a lot in coaching, which is the concept of if we're in a car and we're looking through the mirror, if we spend a lot of time looking in the rear view mirror of the car, we're not paying attention to where we are in the moment and where we're driving to. We're not paying attention to what we see through the windshield, right? The future. So I think we can spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror, which is spending a lot of time dwelling in the past and all of those things that are seated inside of us that we have, regret, resent, trauma, things like that. We could spend a lot of time worrying about what's in the windshield. It's important to look in the windshield more than in the rearview mirror, but we can get overconsumed and it creates a lot of anxiety to look to the future. And so what I'm trying to get to is how important the present moment is.
Which is the driver.
Yes.
Right? So if all those other things were the external environment in that car analogy and the rear view mirror and the windshield, the only true place of power that we all come from is being the driver and the author and the creator of our lives. And so the past triggers and other uncomfortable feelings that are in our shadow aspects that we often don't want to know. If we could become this witness observer, and if we can become more aware in the present moment as a past trigger comes up, in the present moment as it's happening is where we have the power to transmute that or transcend that or transform that. And so only as the driver of our lives, and it doesn't matter what vehicle we're in, it doesn't matter, right, the color, make, or model of our car or the shape or size of any windows that we're looking through. The truth is that all of this journey of personal transformation takes us back inside ourselves, that we are the driver, we are the creator, we are the author of our entire experience here, and everything that's coming into our experiences in the present moment is where we have that perfect choice point to decide how we're going to respond to whatever that experience is. And the more and more and more we can go through these steps of becoming, so I don't know if we want to review that right now, Lacy, but if we talk about witnessing the self, step one is witnessing and engaging that witness observer phenomenon that we've talked about already. And if we can listen with an open heart to consistent feedback, right, in that feedback loop, but being open to it, right, again, as the witness observer, if we can learn about our triggers and just try to become more aware of when our electric circuit board kind of are in our heart center somewhere here, right, on our chest, right, if that's lighting up in response to other interactions or engagements with other people or things, then we need to pay attention to those triggers because they're trying to inform us something about ourselves. Even if we just look at that, it's trying to give us knowledge. It's trying to give us self-awareness. There's great value in our triggers. And there's great values in judging and in not judging our feelings. Because if we can let the feelings just come up from the triggers, from the interactions, and we can understand that there's a lot of information there about ourselves that we need to know so we can come into this greater wholeness and this joy that we all want. So we need to become more aware of the choices. All this brings us back to the fact that we have choice in every area and in every aspect of our lives. And even if you are listening to this today and you feel like, yes, but I have this boss. Yes, but I'm dealing with this insurmountable situation. Yes, but I'm a victim of this circumstance. Yes, but I have no control over X, Y, or Z. You do have the power to make choices inside yourself about how you're going to choose to react, how you're going to choose to witness yourself, how you're going to choose to be open to awareness and to learning more about these deeper aspects of yourself and basically these layers of who you are that are inside yourself that have not been given full permission in your life because they typically aren't in a conditioned society to fully express themselves. And so I want to really speak just a few moments more about the power of choice. Because when we're in the power of conscious choice and we're in the present moment and we realize that every moment is a new experience, right? And a new choice point. And we become aware of our triggers and we become aware of the way we judge ourselves and others. And we become aware of our ego's armor. And we know that we're largely showing up in our lives until we engage this process as a conditioned self. At some level, we're living some version of inauthenticity because we were conditioned to live our lives for somebody else, for something else for so long. And now that we're waking up to the fact that we can choose more of who we are, that we can allow more of who we are, and we can embrace a lot of our talents and our interests and who we really want to be, we also have to admit the pain that has prevented us from fully embracing that. And that's the rabbit hole that we all know that most of us don't want to go down. But again, if we want the freedom, if we want the sovereignty, if we want the joy and abundance and just the good feeling, awesome life that most of us strive for, that we want and desire, we do have to take the steps to become willing to look at the shadow parts of ourselves that have been living outside the light. The shadow is part of the light. And so to come into wholeness, the shadow has to be invited in to be seen and to be worked through at some level in all the interactions we have in the theater of life, right? We have to do that. And when we can recognize that choice is where the point of power, and to me, Lacy, that's the driver. The driver decides, am I looking in the rearview mirror, right? Do I want to look through the windshield? Which obviously, if you're driving a car, you need to be looking through the windshield. But really from a more spiritual perspective, from a higher perspective, from a more wholeness perspective of living an authentic life and a joyful life, it's really looking inside the driver about all the mechanisms that make you tick, all the mechanisms that make you who you are, all the talents, the strengths, the weaknesses, the wounds, the pain,
the vulnerabilities.
All of it. All the triggers. When we're willing to look at all of us show up, we can appreciate each moment and have power of choice in the moment of how we're going to engage, interact, or even release that experience. Sometimes release is called for rather than engagement. But that's for down the road, journeying to self-awareness more and more. But these are options. You don't have to accept every feedback loop as something you have to engage. You do have to be open to witnessing it, to extract the information that it's trying to share with you about you. And then you can say, this is for me. This is not for me. Right? And there's more tools and skills, I'm sure, that we'll be talking about. But just to plant the seed in our self-awareness garden, that we have choice. We have choice. And there's so many tools. We're only mentioning a few. There are many tools out there to support you in your journey to become more self-aware and to know yourself deeper. Is it Socrates that said, know thyself? Right? I think Hippocrates maybe said, food is thy medicine. One of them said that, but somebody said, know thyself. And that's the key to life. That is the key to life, is knowing yourself. Because when you know yourself, you're in your own power. No one else controls you. No one else can torment you. Nobody else manages you. Nobody else suppresses you. You move out of that victim consciousness that is part of our culture today, and you move into a state of empowerment and wholeness that allows you to live and serve and have a more joyful experience while you're here.
Well, and I think that you've just summed up a lot of what Whole Soul School and Foundation seeks to provide humanity at this time. I mean, I think Whole Soul School and Foundation, hopefully, in my mind, is one giant toolbox. And our blogs and our podcasts, our interviews, our time with our guests, we've always said that the conversation is the education.
Yes.
And that's what we're doing here, where we want to provide a platform and a forum for you to take in and begin questioning yourself and heighten your curiosity about how can I be a better person tomorrow? How can I move forward in my life in a positive way? How can I transform myself into a better person by my standards, better than I was yesterday, and live more authentically and thus more joyfully?
Yes. So that's so perfect. And I love how you talked about getting really curious about ourselves, because I think at a point in my life when I was living life to the fullest, and whether I was a student or I was getting my master's degree, or I was journeying my life like everybody else was, right? And is. And then a situation occurred in my life where I had to become deeply curious about who I am, to begin to chisel away the armor that wasn't the true me, and to more committedly discover the real me. And so curiosity is an amazing bridge, and it's fun. Being curious is, in a way, it's playful and it's interested, and it makes the process more fun versus drudgery of self-work, right? That others might feel that way. I think the more people engage, my experience is the more people engage that self-inquiry and self-curiosity and wonder about who you really are, the more it's playful and enjoyable, and it doesn't have to be something to be dreaded, and it is some horrible task. It seems horrible until you engage it in this way, and then it's liberating. And then you wake up every day wondering what you're going to learn about yourself that day. What interactions you're going to have, what actors are going to show up in your field of experience to teach you about you, so that you can become more whole and authentic and awesome, which is who we are. Right? Yes. So just to say again, I think it's really important at the end of this podcast to reiterate that self-awareness is the remedy and the antidote to the unconsciousness and the conditioning of the inauthentic self. And in the podcast to come, we're going to be talking about other tools and other awarenesses and other insights that are important in the journey to continue to support your own personal liberation and your own personal transformation. And I think self-awareness is a profound, profound concept. And I think it's talked about very little in a large way in our culture. It's missing from our media. It's missing from a lot of our information sources. And if it is talked about, it's talked about in a way of really just celebrating our strengths or uncovering our talents, right? And we're encouraged and mentored to be our light. But true self-awareness is to become aware of all of it. And so thank you, Lacy. I want to give you a chance to talk again, but I just wanted to plant the seed with everybody that you can find us on the web at www.wholesoulschoolandfoundation.org. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Buzzsprout. We'll have links in our comment section for the video and the podcast below. Our website is very close to being finished, and so we should be launching at the end of the month, and you will be able to find all of these tools and resources in one place. But you can also find us in the social media platforms that you visit frequently. We're also on Apple iTunes, we're on Google Play Music, Spotify, and some other video channels, Twitter, Facebook, things like that. So please come and find us in any of these venues, especially on our website where you can sign up. And when you subscribe through our website, you can receive our newsletter that it gives a little foreshadowing of the topics that are coming up in the next month, and the guests we're going to be speaking with, and the themes we're going to be focused on. So it helps you to become more of an active participant in this process. Just by subscribing might be your own way to show to yourself that you're open to this journey, that you're open to the exploration, and you're open to becoming more curious about who you really are.
And I'd like to invite our listeners to join us in between now and our next podcast around the 20th of the month to consider watching the movie The Shadow Effect, a movie produced by Debbie Ford and is offered through hayhouse.com, which I believe you can stream it. I also know you can buy it, I believe, on Amazon. It's called The Shadow Effect. And that'll be the movie that we discuss next time we talk. And it takes us into a deeper explanation of what our shadow aspects really are, how they present themselves in our life, and how we can work to transform and transmute their impact on our life through this film. So it's a wonderful film. I used it for a long time in teaching and coaching, and continue to use it and encourage everybody to watch it, so you can kind of join us in our discussion next time.
That sounds great. And many of our listeners may already know, but in addition to the Fireside Chats that we're doing each month, we will have at least one additional podcast. And coming up this month, we'll have another Transformation Talks conversation with a special guest.
Around the shadow.
Yeah. So stay tuned to all of our offerings. We appreciate those of you who are listening and journeying this conversation with us. And we hope you all have a wonderful week and a fabulous day. We send blessings to everyone.